Yeah, welcome to the Making of Me podcast. Today I'm joined by Jon Symes, a speaker, mentor, and founder of Whole and Free, whose work actually help men break free from the invisible stories shaping their life and step into who they truly are. It's really a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, Aro. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, John, what was some of the challenges that actually shape you into who you are today?
Challenges. I was reflecting on this before the show, and my life to begin with was actually free of significant challenges. I was
Yeah,
very fortunate. I was born into a comfortable middle class family. My parents were both teachers. I had a good opportunity to go to good schools, and I think I got a good education. I went to university. This is in England where I was born, and I got a job with a big company,
oh,
which was really the track that I know my mum and dad wanted to set me on. So I was on the right track, if you like. And it wasn't until later that I realized I began to find that there was a sense of what I wanted to contribute in the world, which certainly was not being met by the big company that I was working in. I was fortunate to be able to switch, and I became a trainer and a team and corporate culture consultant to big companies in Europe and around the world, but mostly in Europe. And then the biggest challenge came to me when I was about 40. So you might say it's a
yeah,
classic midlife
yeah.
crisis. But the challenge was that I really was starting to lose any sense of fulfillment in the work that I was doing. I
Mm.
was doing a lot of work that was making corporations more effective. But as I stepped back and looked at the bigger picture of what was going on in the world, doing business better isn't a high priority in a world that's running out of resources, where people are fighting with each other
Yeah.
and marginalized and oppressed in different ways. And so it was almost as if I'd been climbing up a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. And so it was then that I met the challenge of, well, how am I going to reorient what I do and bring my experience and what skills I have to put them in a place where they could make more of a difference in the world. That was the place of biggest challenge for me.
Wow. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So for many men, midlife comes with a quiet sense of being off. What do you think actually caused out the feelings beneath the surface?
Well, I think as men, and it's true for everybody, but I know more about being a man than I do about being a woman. So I tend to work with the stories that we are taught as men. And I don't know for you, Arrow, but it might be stories that are handed down by your father, your grandfather, your uncles, other important men in your life. Sometimes they tell you specifically how to behave as a man or how not to behave.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just pick it up from the way they walk in the world. And so, the easiest example of this for many, many men is, as a boy, I bet you hurt yourself and you might have cried. You might have wanted a hug from your mum. You might have wanted her to make it better and help the pain go away. And for many boys, we have the experience of being told not to cry, not to show weakness, not
Yeah.
to acknowledge that we've been hurt, and somehow to tough it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Tough
That's
love.
that's the simplest example of a story that's then we now have a story that to be a man you don't show pain, you don't show your feelings, you just tough it out. And then we go through our lives repeating that story. That story goes in. I like to think of it sometimes, Arrow, it's like the operating system. So somehow the operating system now knows just whatever you do, don't show pain,
Yeah.
don't show
Yeah.
weakness. And there's the story. And we spend the rest of our lives, if we're not careful, if we don't reflect on it, we spend the rest of our lives living out that story. Well, how does that story work when you're in relationship with another human being? How does that story work if you're a father to children? How does that story constrain you in the choices that you make? And that's one example of the multiple stories that we have as men. And the net effect of that is, as men, we tend to focus on providing for the people that depend on us. So you go to work, earn money, bring the money home. We tend to focus on solving problems. We often try to do that without asking for help. We shouldn't be asking for help. And whatever we do, we don't expose our feelings. When you add all of those together, it's as if we're somehow living in a straitjacket or living in we're kind of constrained in an enormous way by the stories that we we're living. And the net result of that for men in midlife is yes, stuck, numb, lost. I've done everything I was supposed to do. I've done everything I was taught how to do, and my life feels kind of devoid of meaning, devoid of joy and happiness. I spend all my time working. I don't get to show myself, share myself, express myself the way I want to. And I'm conscious that I'm talking about the culture that I grew up in. And this isn't true. There are different flavors to the culture in different places around the world. I'm sure listeners will be reflecting. Some of this seems true to them, but not all. There are cultures that are much better at inhabiting joyful ways of being than the European culture I was born into. But we end up lost in midlife. And Aro, the most frightening thing of all is that men in here in the US where I live, men will die on average 6 years before women who live in the same circumstances. We'll die 6 years earlier because of the stories we're living in and the way that constrains us, affects our capacity to deal with stress, and we'll die of heart failure. We'll be more likely to get into risky and dangerous situations. Men are 5 times more likely than women to end their own life. So we're paying a real price. We're paying a real price for the stories that we live inside of.
Yeah. I think it really a whole lot in that men were actually more like be trained to be a provider, to not express pain, to not express emotion, and just to live strong without needing to kind of explain what is happening internally and everything. Yeah, it has to be rewired again for us to live right and live well. I'm glad we're having this particular conversation.
Yeah.
So you often say that you are not broken, you are buried. What are some of the most common stories that end up burying men?
The stories that bury, well, the ones that we've mentioned seem to occur with to some degree with almost everybody. And the idea that I will sacrifice my own needs and wants underneath the role of providing for the family. And so we don't look after ourselves well. And with the energy we've got left, we're probably numbing ourselves at the end of the day with the TV, the internet, drinking a beer. And so the net effect of the stories is that. But there are other stories that bury men as well. And some of these are particular to families. So in my family, there was a strong story that as men, we needed to be looking after the women in the family. And so whilst I agree that's true, if you take that too far, what you're doing is you're always neglecting your own needs and putting other people first. And so those are the most common stories that I hear from men. And the most worrying comment I hear very often from men here in this country, but I suspect it's true in many places: I don't have anybody I can talk to. And we have friends, but often the conversation we're having with those friends is superficial. It's about what our sports team's doing, or what's in the news, or who the new boss is and why I don't like him or her. And we tend to have conversations about relatively insignificant things and have nowhere we can go to actually talk about how we feel and what's going on. I think that's one of the most dangerous things, is our inability to make connections with other people. A huge percentage of men just don't have a friend to confide in.
That's really amazing, because I know confiding in someone is a whole lot. I think from what you just said, it just simply speak louder to this, that a whole lot of men are biased, having to trust someone and be that very vulnerable to tell them what is going on. Yeah, it's somehow a bit weird, and owing to how the traditional way actually more like brought us up, even if we are going to confide on someone, it's going to be things that are not too deep, not the emotional stuff. Right? And just the way you said, it can remove a whole lot of burdens. Confiding on someone, telling them what you go through, comparing to just holding it and keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Really, really
Sometimes just talking and just saying, do you know what? Today I feel really shit. Just saying it out loud acknowledges it, instead of it being stuck inside of our thinking and we're the only person listening. So do you have a group of friends that you can talk about what's going on in here with?
Yeah, I do. I have a roommate, and I have another friend too that Yeah, even when it comes to relationship, we talk about it, and we
Uh,
actually want to like help each other with each advice. And yeah, sometimes, especially when I go for my daily job, I may come back very angry about some certain stuff. Just to cool it off, sometimes after talking about it, I see another perspective. Even just while speaking about it, remove a whole lot of the burdens, and really, it has really been amazing. Tell us about the idea of narrative liberation. How does changing the
narrative.
stories we live by change everything else?
Well, if we think about these stories as the operating system, then these stories are mostly invisible to us. So if I'm walking in the world with the story that I mustn't show my feelings, but it's not like that's occupying my thoughts. It's just how I've learned to respond to the world. I just keep myself to myself. If we can take that story out and what you've just told me is that you know the value of speaking about what's going on in your inner world. So if we can replace the story about I shouldn't share my feelings with it's really valuable for me to have a place that I can go to or somebody I can go
Yeah.
to discuss and process the difficulties that I'm having. If I change that story, then my behavior changes. So the story acts to guide the choices that we make, but it often does that at the unconscious level. And so we want to change the programming. That's what narrative liberation is. Narrative liberation says get free of the stories you don't want, which means you have to identify what the stories are.
Yeah.
I mean, for years, Aro, I told you I grew up in a fairly privileged way, I suppose. I was able to think for 20, 30 years, the first 30 years of my life, that everybody else thought the way I did. I didn't realize that there are so many different ways of thinking about the world, so many different ways of experiencing the world. But I had the story that your experience would be exactly like mine. And I could therefore anticipate how you thought or you felt, might even be able to anticipate how you'd behave. And it took me a long time to unlearn that story and really understand that people come into the world with so many different perspectives. I can't hope to know about your world, how you see the world. I can ask a lot of questions and I can be curious and I can ask you to share and I can imagine that. But instead of the story that everybody's just like me, the story that replaced that was actually a story of curiosity. What can I find out about this man's perspective or what it's like to walk in the world as a woman? And from that place, I'm now free of the effects of those old stories. And that's what I say. You said the work I do under the banner whole and free. And I want us to be free to express ourselves, because I think that each of us, the part of that says you are whole, we each have an enormous array of wonderful human qualities that we can draw on. We, each of us, can be loving and compassionate and patient and strong and smart and funny and curious. We can be wise. We can be irreverent. We can persevere when things are tough. We can be generous to other people. You and I and everybody listening, we have those capacities. And if you ever doubt it, look into the eyes of a newborn baby. Look into the eyes of a newborn baby and see the light that's there that's waiting to be expressed. And that baby is going to be a unique individual like no other person before and no other person afterwards. And don't we want for that child that they get to express all that they are, to see the world, to make sense of the world and then express themselves in the world with joy, with love, with good humor, and to be able to deal with the challenges that come along in their own way. That's what we want for everybody. And that's inside of us, but it gets covered over by the stories. That child that comes into the world innocent and with access to all of these qualities then gets exposed to the stories that they hear growing up. And that teaching, some of that teaching is deliberate.
Yeah.
Some of that teaching is accidental. It's just the way mum and dad live, the way I see the family around me. And I see it and I start acting the way other people do, because as kids, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And so we
Amazing.
get covered over by the stories that the beautiful, the gem of a human being that each of us are gets covered over. And so what we want to be able to do is find the stories that are covering us and get them out of the way.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Find the story that are covering us and yeah, get them out of the way. So you have actually worked across culture and community. What universal
Yeah.
struggle do you see men sharing, no matter where they are?
Well, almost there are a couple of places I've been where these stories don't live, but in the vast majority of the world, we live underneath the story that men are somehow superior to women. And we live under the story that we as men are in competition with each other. That story, I hear that story almost everywhere I go, that we live in a patriarchal world. There's a belief, there's a story that most boys grow up thinking they're smarter than girls. They certainly grow up thinking they are entitled to more of what's available in the world, more opportunity, more resources. So men grow up with I'm going to say the false belief that we are better than women.
Yeah.
And we grow up in competition with each other. And the world puts us in competition. We end up at some point, even with our friends, we're competing for that girl, or we're competing for that job, or we're competing to be the winner of the prize, whatever the prize is. And I see that almost everywhere I go. Those stories really are deep. They're very difficult to see those stories in real life, but that's what I see. The place I don't see that, Aro, is in the communities that I've been lucky enough to visit, who are still living in the ways that those communities have lived for generations. I'm talking about indigenous people, and I've been very fortunate to live with and study with indigenous people in South America, in the jungles of the Amazon, in the mountains of the Andes, and here in North America. And there are different stories that orient people in those communities. I remember being in the rainforest in Ecuador, and we were talking to the local people, and a man stood in front of, I was there with a group of people. We were talking about the way that there was an oil company that wanted to come and drill for oil in this particular part of the jungle. And in Nigeria, you know all about that. And this man stood in front of us, and he is speaking in his own language. We were working through translators, speaking in his own language. He just looked at us and he said, "You can't come into this forest. You can't come and destroy this forest." He said, "I am the forest. I am the forest." In his world, he was as much a part of the forest as the tree, as the bush, as the snake, as the hawk. I am the forest. And that's a worldview which we've lost in modern culture. We don't see ourselves as part of the natural world. We see ourselves as separate from, rulers over the modern world. Man has dominion over the animals. You know, we've separated ourselves. We have the hubris to separate ourselves from life, and somehow we have the story, and it's a story again, that humans are somehow separate from and able to be independent of each other and all the other aspects of life, you know? And so life becomes an irritation. It's like a mosquito, get off. It's like it's in the way of, you know, I've got to chop that tree down because I want a bigger garden.
Yeah.
It's like, take down those forests because we need some more palm oil.
It's really amazing. Just hearing this from you, I've been an age man, just dawned on me that yes, men actually need more connection between each other and being able to kind of say a whole lot of things that are going through on other than bottling it. So John, thank you so much. So lastly, for men listening who feel numb, pressure, or quietly dissatisfied, what will you say to remind him that his voice and his song still matter?
I'd say to him, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. There's a beautiful whole human being inside of you waiting to be expressed. Take the time to figure out what stories that you perhaps believe in or are living inside of, which are stopping you from finding your true joy and the true meaning of life. But most of all, remember, you're not broken. You are not broken at all. You're simply the product of these stories that have come in and inhabited your thinking.
You are not broken. Product of your habits and those things you have been thinking. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for bringing honesty and depth to this conversation. How can they reach out to you, and how can they, where's the best platform to do this?
The best place is that website. It's go visit wholeandfree.me, and you'll find a contact form there. And really happy for people to contact me with questions or comments or anything they want to say. And on that website, there's a page where there are some free tools. So the one that you just mentioned, the midlife reset, and some other tools, men can go there and take hold of those tools and apply them themselves. It's free. It's designed to help us come back into agency in our own lives, come back to life inside our own lives.
Thank you so much, John. It's really a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being with you, Aro.